the unconscious. It is said to influence our way of living, of loving, our future. The magic of the moon. Truth or myth? The world's seas. For millions of years now, it has been steering the oceans. Every 12 hours, over 1 billion cubic kilometers of water move across our planet in time with the tides. The ebb and flow of the tide are the clearest signs of the enormous pull of the moon. But does it therefore also guide our behavior? To this day, the vast majority of people are convinced that the moon influences us. How we sleep, how we love, when our children are born. Is the mysterious attraction more than a romantic feeling? Is there a secret bond between man and moon?
Alle Menschen der Welt,
Everyone
ob
in
die
the
in
world,
Papua
whether they live
Neuguinea
in Papua
wohnen
New
oder
Guinea
mitten
or in
in
the middle of
Köln,
Cologne,
sie haben
they
alle
all have the
denselben
same
Mond.
moon.
What you can learn from the moon is that things change all the time.
Dass der Mond
That
diese
the moon
Kraft
has this
über die
power
Bedingungen
over the
der
thoughts, the
Vorstellung der Menschen
imagination
hat,
of man over
über
such
so
a
eine
long
lange
period of
Zeit,
time. I
finde
find
ich
that quite
ganz
amazing.
erstaunlich.
C'est vraiment la lune
The moon
ici,
here is
c'est un
spectacle.
spectacle.
There's no other word
Il n'y a
for
pas
it.
d'autre mot.
Our search for the magic of the moon begins in Paris. Not far from the Louvre, we find Jelani Machi, one of the city's top hairdressers. The opening hours of a salon depend on the moonrise at full moon, and that is not expected to happen before midnight today. For almost 40 years now, he's been cutting hair on a full moon. And this despite the fact he was not initially convinced of the influence of the Earth's satellites on hair.
Ce qui m'a poussé à le faire, c'est
I had
parce
the
que j'ai
idea
toujours entendu
because my
parler de la pleine
grandparents
lune,
and also
aussi
my
bien que par
parents
mes
always
grands-parents,
talked
que
about
par
the full
mes
moon and explained to
parents
me that
aussi,
it's
qui
best to
disaient
cut
que c'était
hair on
bénéfique
the
de se
nights
faire
of a full
couper les cheveux
moon.
les soirs de pleine lune.
To be
Franchement,
honest, I
j'ai
never
trouvé ça
took it
tellement...
seriously.
J'ai pas
What
du
I
tout
said
fait
to myself
attention à
was,
ce truc.
just
Je me
another
suis dit, c'est
superstition.
encore une histoire du diable.
But when he receives the first requests from customers, Jelani Machi begins to open his salon on full moon nights, and the skeptic became a fan of the moon.
Dans une autre ambiance,
When I
je dirais
cut hair
même
on a full moon
qu'une
evening,
clientèle
the
qui n'est
atmosphere
pas
is
comme la
different.
clientèle de la
You would
journée.
even say that the
Parce que
clientele
ce
is
qui est drôle,
different
c'est
from that during the
que les
day.
personnes, elles sont pas
Strangely enough,
pressées.
people aren't in such a
Elles veulent
hurry.
passer
They come and spend the whole
toute la
night
nuit
with
avec
me.
moi. Parce que dans la journée,
During
tout
the
le monde
day,
est
everyone
speedé
is
par son
rushing because
travail,
of
par le
work,
temps,
time
par des
pressure
rendez-vous.
appointments.
Et
But the customers
justement,
in the
cette
evening are
clientèle-là du
completely
soir,
different.
elle est complètement différente.
Not only is working more pleasant, Machi found over the years that cutting the hair on a full moon actually makes it grow faster and stronger.
Là,
Here,
le cheveu, il
the
répond pas
hair
du tout.
doesn't respond
Parce
at
qu'il est
all.
complètement abîmé,
It's
il est
completely
oxydé.
damaged,
Et là,
brittle.
toute cette partie,
And here, this whole
le
section,
cheveu,
the
il est
hair
pratiquement
is virtually
inexistant, il est mort
non-existent here.
complètement.
It's dead.
Donc pour lui
So, in
redonner
order
vie,
to revive it,
je suis
I'm
obligé,
forced, with your permission,
principe
to
avec
cut
son
off at
accord,
least this
c'est
section
de
to
recouper
bring
au
it
moins
back to
toute cette
life.
partie-là pour lui refaire vivre le cheveu.
However, Machi's experience has shown that our satellite can only unfold its full effect on the hair under the open skies. So it's off outside at midnight, even if a thunderstorm is approaching on this night, in place of a view of the full moon. The hairdresser faces up to the wet element. Does the hair really grow back stronger and faster? Machi's customers swear by it. And even when when the shower turns into a downpour, the master keeps his scissors chopping. This is an experience in any case. Why do so many people firmly believe in lunar influences on psychological and biological processes? Is the moon perhaps not only the ruler of the tides, but also of the plant world? A Swiss professor is certain the tree is the link between man and moon.
Wenn der Mensch in die Welt
When man
hinausschaut
looks
und
out
in
into the
die
plant world,
Pflanzenwelt,
he
dann
actually encounters a
begegnet ihm
being
eigentlich
that
ein
is
Wesen, das
absolutely
eigentlich
outstanding,
absolut
and that is the
überragend
tree.
ist, das ist der Baum.
Trees can live for a very long time. The oldest is probably 9,500 years old.
Zeitlich, räumlich
In terms
ist
of
er
time
größer als der
and
Mensch
space, it is
in diesen,
larger than
beiden
man in these
Beziehungen.
two regards.
Und
And to
eigentlich für mein
me, trees
Empfinden
are something
sind
like
die
the
Bäume
people of
so
the
etwas
plant
wie die
world.
Menschen in der Pflanzenwelt.
Does this mean that trees guard a cosmic secret?
In allen Kulturen hat der
The tree
Baum
actually
eigentlich eine
plays a central
zentrale
role
Stelle.
in all
Das ist
cultures.
die Achse des,
This is the
der
axis of the
Welt
world
zwischen
between
Erde und
Earth
Himmel.
and sky.
Aber jetzt
But now
merken wir
with our
mit der
research,
Forschung, dass
we're
es
realizing
viel
that it's
konkreter
much
ist,
more
als man
specific
sich
than we
vorstellt. Das sind
imagine.
nicht nur
These are not only symbols
Symbole
or
oder
archetypes, there
Archetypen, das
is
sind
real
wirklich
interaction.
Wirksamkeiten. Die Bäume
The
pulsieren
trees
nicht nur mit
pulsate
der
not only
Erde,
with the Earth root
Wurtelsystem,
system, climate,
Klima,
but also with the
sondern auch
cosmic
mit den
events, with these
kosmischen Geschehen,
rhythms.
also mit diesen Rhythmen.
Are the lunar cycles related to the growth of trees? How do some of them manage to survive such unbelievable periods of time undamaged? How can we use this knowledge? In Berchtesgaden, in the Saghäusel, the moon has determined for generations when the trees are felled. When a cycle is over, father and son set off into the forest.
Und den ganzen Winter sind es 9
Throughout the whole
Tage, wo
winter,
man
there are only
Holz
9
ernten
days on
kann
which you can harvest
für
wood for
Bauholz
building
und
timber. And today is such a day,
Und
a
heute ist so ein
beautiful
Tag.
day.
Ein schöner.
If the wood is to survive for centuries, it is only felled here if the moon is not visible in the sky, on a new moon. Today is the last day of the year on which they will drive out into their forest on the mountain. Their great-grandfathers planted the spruces they plan to fell today. It takes around 140 years for a spruce to grow this tall. The felling process is much faster. It only takes 10 minutes.
Wenn man einmal mit dem begonnen hat,
Once you've
dann
started with
hat
it,
man
you
ein
develop an
inneres
inner
Gespür
sense of how
dafür,
nature works.
wie
And you no
die
longer think
Natur
about
abläuft.
whether you should
Und
do it
man-
on another day.
Man überlegt nicht mehr, ob
But
man
you
es
know that today is the
an
right
einem anderen
day.
Tag machen soll, sondern
And
man
then I do
weiß,
it.
heute ist der richtige Tag und dann mache ich das. Wir haben vor 15 Jahren
15
bei uns
years
im
ago,
Haus
we took
aus
all the
diesem Wald
moonwood from this
das
forest to
komplette
construct the
Rundholz
roof
genommen und haben
structure for
unsere
our
Dachstuhl
house,
genau am richtigen
exactly at the
Zeichen
right juncture.
geschlagen
And guess what?
damals.
We haven't
Und
used
wir
a
haben
drop
am
of
ganzen
paint
Haus
or
keinen
wood
Tropfen
preservative
Farbe
on
und
the
keinen
whole
Tropfen
house. It's
Holzschutzmittel.
just wonderful.
Und
You
es
can't do it any better.
macht sich wunderbar, man kann es nicht besser machen.
People from the wood industry used to regard them as eccentric with their lunar wood. But word that it is more durable, entirely without the use of chemicals, is slowly spreading.
Hopefully we'll be able to leave that esoteric label behind, but I think we can live with that, can't we?
You only have to work hand in hand with the moon, then you get wood for eternity. That has always been the motto here in the Saghäusel. They don't need scientific proof for that. Lately, the Geislingers have started receiving orders from all over Germany. They recently delivered their wood for the construction of the organ in the Elbe Philharmonic Hall in Hamburg. It hasn't changed the way they work. They simply sell good wood. even if they now call it lunar wood, in keeping with the spirit of the times. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, one of the largest education and research centres in Switzerland, is not only breaking new ground in an architectural sense. Professor Ernst Zürcher could be enjoying his retirement, but the universities invite him to come and talk about the influence of the moon on wood. Not only did the scientist discover that people in earlier cultures took the cycles of the Earth's satellite into account when processing wood, he was also able to detect green tides in the trees.
Der Mond hat eine riesige
As well as the
Wirkung
sun,
neben
the
der
moon,
Sonne
of course,
natürlich
also
auf
has a
alle
huge
biologischen
effect on all
Prozesse, am
biological
besten sichtbar bei den
processes.
Pflanzen.
This is best visible in plants.
Und das wieder
Rediscovering
aufzudecken
this
ist
is
sehr
very
wichtig in der
important in
Physiologie, in der
physiology,
Keimung,
in
in den
germination, in the
Holzeigenschaften.
properties of
Ist
wood.
ein lebendiges
After all, it's a
Material.
living material.
Und das haben wir jetzt
And we
wissenschaftlich
have now approached this from a scientific perspective and been able to show that it has measurable, provable,
messbar, beweisbar,
statistically
statistisch
analyzable effects on the living world.
Effekte hat auf die Lebenswelt.
The Swiss scientist was able to prove that trees pulse in time with the moon. Their trunk diameter increases and decreases every 12 hours in synchronization with the ebb and flow of the tide. What would nature, the earth or man be without the moon? For Pascal Descamps, astronomer at the Paris Observatory, these are precisely the exciting questions.
The moon is very important for the Earth and its inhabitants. It has also played a very important role in the past. You could say that without the moon, there would be no life on Earth.
4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was still racing around in orbit. Scientists estimate that a day lasted only 2 to 3 hours back then. Life probably would not have developed under these conditions.
So the Earth was turning very quickly, with a moon that was still very close to the Earth. The tidal forces were very strong, i.e. the tides flooded the continents and retreated. That was quite devastating. Fortunately, however, the moon began to slowly distance itself from the Earth in this phase. The tidal forces slowly decreased, everything calmed down, and life could gradually emerge. So the moon is indeed indispensable. It was, and it still is until today.
The Earth and the Moon. Only together did they form the stable pair with which life on Earth began. Without the moon, we would not have the 4 seasons which in their even change enabled the beginning of evolution. The moon, our clock that sets the rhythm for life.
Ich habe viele Kollegen, Musiker, die sehr gerne in der Nacht tätig sind und in der Nacht musizieren, weil die ganze Stimmung in der Nacht ist so etwa ein bisschen mystisch, ein bisschen nicht aus dieser Welt. Und da kommt man, ich persönlich natürlich auch, komme auf einige Ideen. Und wenn der Mond als eine Art Wegweiser da ist, als Lichtquelle in einer dunklen Nacht, dann ist es eine wunderbare Inspiration.
The port of Hamburg. The sun is shining, so it's out onto the water. Or what does the horoscope say? People have always tried to use celestial bodies to interpret their fate. As well as the stars and the sun, the moon is often of key interest for astrologers. For Manuel Arrea, it tells people what they need.
The history of astrology is very long and has, of course, passed through different eras in which different facets of astrology were particularly important. And today the connection with psychology is a key topic. And also the great gift of a very nice, differentiated anthropology, which is much more precise than all other systems.
Many people are familiar with the 12 signs of the zodiac. The sun takes almost 30 days to traverse a constellation. The moon is faster. It changes signs every 2.5 days. The 4 phases of the moon's orbit and the 12 constellations formed a celestial clock for astrologers. A horoscope from which it is not only possible to read what conducive or inhibitory factors the future holds in stores for one's intentions. For astrologers, the moon is like a compass that reveals what is good for day after day.
This means that the mood changes every 2.5 days. Yes, you can observe this. Just take a look at your circle of friends and at how people behave when the moon is in Leo, or when it is in Taurus or Pisces. In Pisces, they might be very emotional, very sensitive, and you have to handle them with kid gloves. And when they're in Leo, you might feel like going out, hitting the town, going dancing with your girlfriend or whatever. But you can observe it yourself because it changes completely every 2.5 days.
For Manuela Reyer, the Earth's satellite reflects our emotional world. It is her advisor and teacher, especially in situations of crisis.
What you can definitely learn from the moon is that things change all the time, and that everything repeats itself, that there is an ever-returning cycle that simply reflects life and what surrounds us. And through this, you can also develop a certain kind of serenity for your own life.
But can the influence of the moon on us humans also be scientifically proven? In the animal world, especially on the coasts, it is only the tides that make it possible for some species to reproduce on land and ensure their survival. For others, the light of the full moon is the signal to mate or lay eggs. Take the largest living turtle, for example. The leatherback turtle only comes onto the beach to lay its eggs at springtide and full moon. After the work is done, the moon shows her the way back to the sea. At the Great Barrier Reef off the Australian coast, thousands of corals release their gametes into the water every spring, as if on command. Like an underwater blizzard, all coral species here reproduce following the rhythm of the lunar cycles. To this day, no one knows why this is. It has now been scientifically proven for a South Pacific worm that the moon is the clock of fertility. On Samoa, the islanders celebrate a festival in fall called Tatalega, the Night of the Worms. In a single night, regularly at the time of the last quarter of the moon in October or November, millions of palolo males and females, shimmering in shades of green and brown, separate from the ends of their bodies, which are loaded with eggs and sperm. They move towards the moonlight, to the surface of the sea to unite there. The islanders are then ready and waiting with nets, baskets and lamps to fish the caviar of the South Seas out of the ocean. Biologists have shown that the worm's reproduction cycle is closely linked to the change in the phase of the moon. But what about us humans? Does our sexuality tick in time with the lunar clock? Does the full moon really make us more sensual? There is no doubt that the moon possesses an erotic radiance. Is the seductive moon male or female? Anne Marchand has tried to trace the identity of the moon, but it even changes genders in the languages. In the Romance languages, it's called la lune, la luna, and is female, while in German, der Mond is male.
Il est impossible de dire
In general, it is impossible to say whether the moon is male or female,
parce que dans le monde entier,
depending on the myth or the mythology of the respective people.
De chaque peuple, elle peut
it can be either male or female,
soit féminine, soit
or also a little
curieusement
of both.
un peu les deux.
The Romans worshipped Luna, the goddess of the night, while the Greeks had a whole range of moon goddesses. Selene, Artemis, Danae. In the north, there was the moon god, Mani.
En ce qui concerne
In Europe,
l'Europe,
the oldest stories
les
belong
récits
to
les plus
Greek
anciens
mythology.
appartiennent à la mythologie grecque.
Selene is
Sélénée
female.
est féminine,
Since she is a
mais
being
c'est
of the
une
sky,
femme,
the air,
comme elle est
she's very
dans l'espace,
unstable.
elle est en l'air,
And
elle
she
est
has
très
a
volage,
weakness for good-looking
et elle
young
aime beaucoup les
men.
beaux garçons.
The moon goddesses were also revered for their influence on human fertility. Does the belief that more children are born on a full moon trace back to this myth? Dorothee Struck is a gynecologist and lives by the sea. She's sure that certain combinations of moon phase and water level are the starting signal for births. The moon has already caused her particularly strenuous working days.
Also es war
So that was sometime in the 90s, the only night with 13 children. I didn't know if I was coming or going, and how many boys or girls had been born. I just kept running from one delivery room to the next, followed by two midwives. There are certain lunar constellations when there is quite a lot going on, and with others not.
Many people are convinced that more children are born on a full moon. According to one theory, microtides could have an effect upon the unborn child floating in the amniotic sac and trigger birth. Despite large-scale studies, science has not yet been able to establish a connection between the full moon and an increase in births. We asked Dorothee Struck, an Orthodox medical practitioner.
Und es ist bekannt, dass in
We know that in
Gesellschaften ohne
societies without light
Lichtverschmutzung, das heißt,
pollution,
ohne
in
dass
other
wir
words,
nachts von
societies
Licht
not
belästigt
bothered by light at
werden,
night, women in general
ja,
always
die Frauen
menstruate
eigentlich
to a
immer
new
zum Neumond
moon and then
menstruieren, oder ganz
ovulate
viele
14
Frauen,
days later
und dann
at
14
full
Tage
moon.
später zum
And
Vollmond,
exactly 9
den Eisprung
cycles
haben,
later,
und
again
genau
at full
9
moon,
Zyklen
many
später,
children are
wieder
born.
zu Vollmond, bekommen viele Kinder.
Testimonies of ancient cultures report a synchronicity of female cycles, according to which all women are said to have been ready to conceive at the same time during a full moon. A lunar cycle lasts 29.5 days and is thus about the same length as the cycle of many women. A coincidence? A psychiatrist from Prague claims to have discovered that every woman has an individual lunar phase cycle that begins with her birth and continues with absolute precision throughout her childbearing years. This lunar phase cycle can shift in modern women due to light pollution and stress. They then even have 2 cycles. Sometimes, therefore, the most fertile days are during the period. Women who want to conceive can now have their lunar cycle calculated in gynecologist practices.
Wir müssen ja nicht immer alles 100%
We don't always have to manage absolutely everything. The women with a desire to conceive are often under pressure anyway. But I can see what I can transfer into everyday life, what can help me to reconnect with nature, and also find this belief that our female nature is able to swing us back into cycles, and our body can repair a lot.
Und unser Körper ganz viel reparieren kann.
If you ask science, the long-distance effect of the moon can hardly be proved. But 88% of Germans believe in it. So, what is true about the magical power of the moon? We pose this question to moon fans in front of the Hamburg Planetarium, who meet here in summer for the full moon open air with music.
Chaque fois que la lune est pleine,
always at full moon, we live only 500 meters away from here. We come here to the meadow with a small picnic. Of course, we have a drink and listen to music. The atmosphere is amazing.
Écoutez cette musique, c'est une atmosphère, c'est bien.
But does it influence how we sleep, how we love and live?
ich habe 2 Kinder.
Well, I have 2 children, and one child was born one day before the full moon, and my daughter was born exactly on a full moon. And well, yes, they say that most children are born at that time, and with me it was true. And that is my connection to the moon.
Meine Verbindung zum Mond.
Everyone seems to have their own personal relationship with it. Lovers and moon worshippers. And those who can't sleep anyway. But who wants to sleep on a night like this and with such a view? Many scientists have already tried to fathom the great insomnia. A Swiss chronobiologist took the matter in hand.
Wir waren in einer Vollmondbar in Basel. Und die hat wirklich nur zu Vollmondzeiten offen. Und dann haben wir uns die Frage gestellt, ja, warum fasziniert der Mond die Leute so? Warum beklagen sich viele Leute über Schlafstörungen während des Vollmonds?
From that point on, Christian Kajochen couldn't stop thinking about the moon. He wanted to know more. Do we humans have an inner lunar clock that controls our sleep? Do we really sleep worse on a full moon? If so, why could this never be proven? Or is it just the bright light from the moon that disturbs our sleep? The chronobiologist invited 30 test subjects to the University of Basel's sleep laboratory. They were not told that the test to be conducted focused on the influence of the moon on their sleep behavior.
Sie haben ein Problem, dass wenn Sie Leuten sagen, wir gehen jetzt den Mond.
You have a problem when you tell people we're going to examine the moon now. We're conducting a moon study. And that actually already influences their results. We have to somehow sell it under a different guise, so to speak, but in a manner that's ethically justifiable.
A so-called blind study was therefore conducted, and to rule out the factor that only the bright light from the moon makes people sleep worse, the study participants had to spend the night in the laboratory.
Wir haben Labors, also wir sind in einem solchen hier, wo wir die Leute quasi abschirmen von der Umwelt. Also Umweltfaktoren wie Lärm, wie Temperaturschwankungen, wie Licht, also die haben auch kein Mondlicht gesehen, oder wie soziale Kontakte, die sind völlig abgeschirmt hier. Das Ziel ist wirklich, die endogene Rhythmen, also Rhythmen, die im Körper entstehen, zu messen.
The scientists did not believe that they would see a measurable effect of the moon on their test sleepers. This is how they formulated their theory. After all, what could humans notice without the direct shine of the moonlight? The result was all the more surprising.
Wir haben nur Schläfer rekrutiert, die eine Schlafeffizienz von 95% haben, also quasi die ganze Zeit schlafen, wenn sie im Bett sind. Aber auch bei diesen haben wir gesehen, dass sie zu Vollmondphasen 5 Minuten länger brauchen, um einzuschlafen, 30% weniger Tiefschlaf hatten und auch die Schlafeffizienz um gewisse Prozentpunkte signifikant tiefer war als zu Leuten, die zufälligerweise um die Neumondphase bei uns waren. Und haben dann lange gezögert, diese Daten auch zu publizieren, weil man da immer ein bisschen schräg angeschaut wird. Lunatic, oder man ist dann plötzlich, wird man vielleicht ein bisschen in die esoterische Ecke gestellt. Und ich weiß nicht, was dahinter steckt. Aber mich fasziniert er noch mehr als vor der Studie, muss ich sagen.
Johanna Paunger turned her fascination with the moon into her profession. The trained bank clerk tries to live in harmony with the rhythms of the moon and passes on her knowledge to other people. Today, she is out collecting herbs with a beginner group.
wisst, was es geht nach dem
You know what
Mondeinfluss,
it's about,
dass
the
man
influence
nicht
of the
immer
moon.
alles zu jeder Zeit
That you
macht,
can't do certain
weder
things
pflücken
just any time, such as
noch
picking and
trocknen
drying.
und auch die Verwendung. Das Johanniskrautöl, das
We know
kennen
that
wir, das
St.
geht
John's
den
wort
Nerven
oil
gut oder für
is good for the
Verbrennungen
nerves or
und das
for
ist
burns.
rot.
And
Das
it's red.
Johanniskrautöl ist nur
St. John's
zunehmend
wort oil is only
heilkräftig.
curative in the waxing moon,
Und wenn man es da
and if you fill it
abfüllt
then and
ins
leave it out in the
Öl und in
sun,
der Sonne stehen
then you
lässt,
have
dann
it for
hat man für
years. It doesn't get
Jahre, das wird auch
rancid.
nicht
You have a
ranzig,
healing power
hat
that
man ein
really
Heilkraut,
helps.
das wirklich hilft.
Johanna Paunger grew up on a farm in Tirol. Her grandfather did everything according to the lunar calendar, her mother too. She made the knowledge of the right time into her mission. She writes books and gives seminars. It's all very easy for her, for example, when cooking jam.
Also Marmelade
So
einkochen
I
mache
only
ich
make
grundsätzlich
jam
nur
when the
nach
moon is
richtigem
right,
Mond, weil da ist mir die
because that's
Arbeit
the only
sonst
time
zu
it's
schade.
worth putting the effort
Erstens
in.
einmal hält's
First of all,
länger,
it
obwohl es
lasts
bei uns
longer,
nicht sein muss, weil
whereby
wir
that's not
relativ
always the
gern die
case with us
Eigenmarmelade
because we
essen.
like to eat our own
Aber
jam.
wichtig ist, wer jetzt
But it's
anfängt,
important
man
for
muss
who's
sich gar nicht so
starting.
viel merken.
You don't have to remember that
einfach
much.
nie an die Jungfrau.
So just
Wenn im
never do
Kalender
it when the
Jungfrau
calendar
steht,
is in Virgo.
da
It
ist
doesn't matter if
egal,
you're
ob man
making jam or
Marmelade
something
einkocht
else,
oder was
it'll go
anderes,
moldy.
das wird
So a
schimmelig.
fruit day like
Also
today,
eine Fruchtachse,
and then with a
die
waning
Frucht
moon,
hat
that's
und dann noch
ideal.
abnehmen im Mond, das ist ideal.
The Tyrolean has rewritten the old farmer's rules. Her lunar calendar has been translated into 8 languages and sold around 2 million times. The moon tells her the right time to wash her clothes, go to the doctor, or harvest apples. Nowadays, the mother of 3 children advises farmers, wine growers, and gardeners.
Ja, also der Mond für mich
Well,
ist
the moon
inzwischen
has
mehr
become
als
more
nur
than
ein
just a
Begleiter.
companion for
Gehört
me
so
now.
dazu
It is as
wie
much a part of my life as
die
the air I
Luft.
breathe.
Ich könnte
I
mir's
couldn't
anders
imagine it
eigentlich gar
any
nicht
other way.
vorstellen, aber
But
immer
always
mit
from the
dem Gesichtspunkt,
perspective
dass
that we
wir
use the
den Mond
moon,
nützen,
but we do not
aber
exploit
nicht
anything.
etwas ausnützen.
We visit the oldest university observatory in the world, Ode Sterrenwacht, in Leiden in the Netherlands. Harold Hiesinger and Marcus Landgraf are planning the next mission to the moon for the European Space Agency, ESA. Thanks to modern probes orbiting the Earth's satellite, the 2 moon enthusiasts are familiar with every crater. Before astronomers began to observe the moon with binoculars and telescopes, people were already using the changeable moon as a sky clock.
Jetzt haben wir es sehr gut. Schau du mal rein. Also in der früheren Zeit war natürlich auch wichtig, gewisse Termine einzuhalten. Früher gab es eben keine genauen Handykalender. Wir brauchten also so eine Art Taktgeber. Und der Mond ist natürlich ein super Objekt dafür, weil es regelmäßig alle 29 Tage in derselben Phase wiederkommt. Und das hilft natürlich im Alltagsleben, wenn man Fragen beantworten muss, wann muss ich die Saat ausprägen, wann kann ich ernten, wann muss die Kuh auf die Weide. Und ich spekuliere mal, dass es natürlich daher auch so eine gewisse Bauernregel entstanden sind, dass in einer gewissen Mondphase gewisse Dinge zu tun sind oder man gewisse Dinge in einer gewissen Mondphase relativ zum Frühlingspunkt zum Beispiel machen. Eigentlich ist das sehr schön, dass wir so eine kulturelle Verbindung haben zu einem Himmelsobjekt. Hier ist der Jupitermond.
The observation of the moon has constantly changed our culture. In the 17th century, the moon was regarded as divine and perfect, as a flawless disk, until Galileo Galilei examined it through binoculars. In the blurred patterns of shadow and light, the Florentine researcher was the first to recognize the true face of our closest cosmic neighbor.
Der Mond war das einzige Objekt, das Strukturen zu erkennen gab, und mit den ersten Teleskopen konnte man dann auch schon Gebirge sehen, Täler, ganz ähnliche Strukturen wie auf der Erde, was zu der Überlegung führte, dass das kein Objekt ist, das irgendwie in den göttlichen Rahmen gehört, sondern dass es tatsächlich ein Teil der Natur ist. Und das ist ja so ein Grundgedanke der Renaissance, dass tatsächlich die Natur ihren eigenen Raum einnimmt und dass es eben nicht nur die menschliche Sphäre und die göttliche Sphäre gibt.
In 1610, Galileo Galilei published his observations in the Messenger of the Stars, shaking up the prevailing world view. In it, he claims that the moon is a second Earth and that the sun is the core around which all the planets revolve. The Church considered Galileo's findings heresy. Above all, the heliocentric worldview, with the sun in the center, contradicts the Bible. Because the Bible says,
Then Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said, Sun, be at rest over Gibeon, and you, O moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun was at rest, and the moon kept its place.
And as the Bible was not allowed to be mistaken, the Holy Inquisition forced Galileo Galilei to revoke his theories. Vatican astronomers have been studying space for centuries. The Jesuit father Juan Casanovas also conducted research at the Specula Vaticana, the papal observatory, until his death. It took over 100 years for the Church to acknowledge its mistake, and over 300 years until Galileo Galilei was rehabilitated in 1992. This was particularly bitter for the Vatican astronomer.
The theologians have waited a long time to reinterpret this passage of Scripture. It was we astronomers who forced them to do so. And the theologians took a very long time to admit their mistake. That's my opinion. The theologians were not interested in the problem we astronomers had. They didn't really care whether the sun rotated around the Earth or vice versa.
Sono le orbite, non è interessati per niente. Questa è la mia tesi.
The Vatican Observatory was found by Pope Gregory XIII in order to reach an agreeable date for Easter with a calendar reform. The date depends on the beginning of spring and the first full moon of spring. It could not be precisely calculated with the Julian calendar previously used. The Gregorian calendar was therefore introduced, which is still the most widely used calendar worldwide. The Catholic Church no longer has the sole power to interpret heaven and earth. Galilei continued his research. A bird's feather falls more slowly than an iron hammer. Since Aristotle, weight has been the decisive factor for the velocity of fall. The researcher has his doubts. From his experiments, he concludes that all objects fall at the same speed, regardless of material and mass. In a vacuum, even a feather and a hammer should touch the ground at the same time. In 1971, the Apollo 15 astronaut David Scott used his stay on the moon for a special homage to Galileo Galilei.
Beautiful picture, Dave. Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Galileo's view of the world has become generally accepted. People have long since landed on the moon, but the celestial body was able to keep one secret for a very long time.
Die frühen Astronomen waren natürlich sehr fasziniert von der Tatsache, dass der Mond immer dieselbe Seite zeigt. Er verändert sich scheinbar von der Erde aus nicht. Das ist ja anders wie mit anderen Objekten. Die Jupitermonde drehen sich. Und das hat damals schon die frühen Astronomen sehr beschäftigt und auch zum Mythos Mond beigetragen, weil man spekulieren konnte, was ist auf dieser anderen Seite.
The changeable moon. It only shows us one side. What is it hiding behind its back? The fantasies of science fiction authors range from aliens to Nazis hiding there. Anne Marchand is an ethnologist, and she's also fascinated by the dark stories about the moon, which can conjure up evil in us.
There is also this dark aspect of the moon, because in mythology, all good things must also have a negative side. And often the person who brings life is the person who brings death. In Egypt, the moon begins as a fearsome god, a god of death.
North of Luxor, in Upper Egypt, the moon shows other facets. The Temple of Dendera can be found here, a sanctuary which represents the cosmos, like a stone book holding secret knowledge about the sky's spheres. A ceiling frieze inside explains the phases of the moon. A staircase with 14 steps symbolizes the 14 days of the waxing moon. They are climbed by 14 gods. Upon reaching the top, they see the full moon.
And here we find again the Egyptian idea of eternal life, that is to say, of living on in the hereafter. Here we find the constantly renewing moon.
Moon, death, recurrence. Is that why the moon features in every horror story? In legends and fairy tales, wolves howl at the full moon. Countless myths are linked to the dark side of the moon. At one moment, it is still a guarantor for romance, then it's a cue for the appearance of evil.
C'est quand même un personnage nocturne. Et comme tous les personnages
and then the moon is
de la
also a
nuit,
creature of the night.
pour nous, humains,
But for us
qui ne
humans,
sommes pas
who are not made to see at
faits
night,
pour voir la nuit,
for us, every
principe, la
sound,
nuit, on
every
ne voit
light,
pas. On dort.
everything that happens in the dark
Tous les
takes on
bruits,
disturbing
toutes
proportions.
les lumières, les choses qui arrivent la nuit prennent des proportions inquiétantes.
The lunatics is an English term for those who have been struck by lunar insanity. They strike when the moon shines round and pale. This is when people turn into werewolves or mutate into bloodsuckers. Everyone is a moon and has a dark side that he does not show to anyone, wrote Mark Twain. Novels, films, and music have puzzled over what dark aspects of human existence this could be. The dark side of the moon has also left numerous works of art to future generations. The cultural scientist Bernd Brunner regrets that science revealed the hidden side of the moon a long time ago.
Die dunkle Seite des Mondes,
The dark side of the moon.
irrige
This is, of
Vorstellung,
course,
muss ich
basically
nochmal,
a mistaken idea,
ist ja gar
because
nicht
it's not
dunkel,
dark at
ist
all.
nur für
It's
uns
only dark
dunkel,
for
weil wir
us,
sie meistens,
because we
also
mostly,
sehen Teile
well,
davon
we see
manchmal,
parts of
aber
it
die
sometimes.
ist genauso hell wie
But
die
it's as
andere
bright as the
Seite.
other side.
Nur
Only that
das,
we would
da mussten
first
wir halt
have
auch
to have
erst
the
die
possibility to
Möglichkeit
travel
haben,
behind the
hinter
moon.
den Mond zu reisen. Das war
That was
irgendwann in den
sometime in the
späten
late
50er Jahren,
50s
dass
that
man
you could
dann
become
sich
convinced
davon
that it's not
überzeugen
dark
konnte,
there
dass
at
es dort
all.
eben gar nicht dunkel ist.
The race to the moon begins with a head start for the Russians. In January 1959, their Luna 1 was launched. With Luna 2, the first spacecraft reached the moon, and Luna 3 circumnavigated it and sent the first photos of its remote side. But the Americans are catching up. On December 24, 1968, 3 astronauts on board the Apollo 8 circumnavigate the moon for the first time. They send the first man-made images of the back of the celestial body back to Earth. On the last test flight before the moon landing, something strange happened to the crew of Apollo 10. The astronauts are in almost constant radio contact with the control center in Houston.
Houston, 3.5 minutes. They're still looking good. Your predicted cutoff is right on the nominal. At 3 hours, 11 minutes into the mission, the distance from Earth, 3,140 nautical miles.
Having arrived on the side facing away from the Earth, the landing capsule separates from the mothership for the first time. Then the signal to Earth breaks off. The moon is blocking the way for radio waves. Conversations on board are still being recorded. NASA releases the transcriptions of these tapes in 2008, and finally the tapes themselves. At first, it's all irrelevant chatter, but then something strange can be heard.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound?
For Commander John Young, it sounds like outer space music, and Eugene Cernan answers in the landing module.
Yeah, it sounds like, outer space type music.
The astronauts keep the inexplicable phenomenon to themselves. What did they hear? Was it just radio waves crossing, or an electromagnetic buzzing from the depths of the universe? When the Earth is back in sight,
Apollo 10, this is Houston, we have radio contact again.
The sound is gone. The late publication of the tape recordings and the silence of the astronauts fed the rumors about extraterrestrials. Since time immemorial, the moon has been our nocturnal companion, near and yet so unattainably far away. Its greatest enchantment goes back to the romantics of the 19th century. They made Luna, the goddess of the night, their muse. The director of the Kroniga Museum has been hot on the seducer's heels for quite some time, and is always finding new treasures of lunar infatuation.
Und natürlich fällt auf, dass die Romantiker sehr oft Nachtansichten gemalt haben. Viel mehr als die anderen. Dann stellt sich wieder die Frage, warum eigentlich? Das geht dann auch in der Musik oder in der Dichtkunst. Der Mond wird besungen, beschrieben und gemalt.
Described and painted, perhaps on the search for a new image of nature.
Einem neuen Bild der Natur.
For us today, in the 21st century, one thinks, well,
im 21. Jahrhundert denkt man, naja, 1820, da war die Natur noch sauber. Aber im Bewusstsein der Menschen damals
industrialization had already begun.
Schon an.
The cities were full,
Die Städte
one
waren
began
voll.
to see nature, and with
Man
it
fing
also
an, die
the light
Natur
of
und
nature,
damit eben auch das
daylight,
Licht der Natur,
nightlight,
Tageslicht,
in a new
Nachtlicht,
and better
neu
way.
und besser zu sehen.
The moon, the sun of the night, its light has fascinated artists. And no one has focused their work as much on the moon as Caspar David Friedrich. For him, the moon was a mirror of the human soul.
Friedrichs Bilder vom Mond oder eigentlich von Menschen, die den Mond betrachten, sind ja wirklich Schlüsselbilder. Da ist der Mond das Thema, aber eigentlich die Betrachtung des Mondes.
Yes,
dass
that
der
person
Mensch
standing, reflecting in
steht,
nature,
sich besinnt in der
otherwise
Natur,
sees
sonst sieht man
nothing,
auch
and
nichts
is simply
und
looking
einfach
at a
ein
light
Lichtphänomen anguckt, was ja
That's
eigentlich völlig
completely
uninteressant ist.
uninteresting.
Jeden Tag geht der Mond auf und
Every
unter.
day the moon rises and
Warum sollen
falls.
wir denn da
Why should we
hingucken?
look at it?
Aber nein,
But no,
die Beobachtung, das
observation,
Hinschauen,
looking,
Kontemplieren,
contemplating,
andächtig
standing
stehen, den
devoutly
Mond
looking at the
betrachten,
moon, that was
das war
interesting
für
for
Friedrich
Friedrich.
interessant. Er hat darin
He probably
wahrscheinlich
interpreted creation.
Schöpfung hineininterpretiert.
Nature
Und
is
die
God's
Natur ist
creation,
Gottes
and
Schöpfung.
everything
Und
in
alles in der
nature, from a
Natur, der
blade of grass
Grashalm
to the
bis zum
moon,
Mond,
is
ist
proof of God.
ein Gottesbeweis.
You just have to look properly.
Man muss nur richtig gucken.
Luna unfolds her most beautiful glow in the works of the painters, but she also has a wide range of colors herself. The moon is not just grey. Sometimes it presents itself in honey yellow, then in strawberry red, or even blood red. And when there is a lot of dust particles in the atmosphere, it can turn blue. But blue moon actually means a second full moon in a month. The moon has lost nothing of its attraction, especially when it promises a full eclipse. Like on July 27, 2018, when hobby astronomers like here in the Lüneburger Heide and many other parts of the world look for the best places to watch the rare spectacle in the sky. When the lunar eclipse begins, the moon dips into the shadow of the Earth. This happens when the sun, moon, and Earth are almost in a line. Some sunlight still reaches the moon, and so it remains just slightly visible as a so-called blood moon. Slowly, it steps out of the shadow of the Earth and begins to shine. For 103 minutes, it was once again the focus of enthusiasm for people around the world, not something that can be copied easily.
Ich glaube, der Mond fasziniert jeden auf seine Weise wieder anders.
Everyone differently in its own way. Some as a scientist, others as a religious symbol, and others again as a light phenomenon. But these possibilities that the moon offers you to people of different cultures, this is incredibly interesting.
Wahnsinnig interessant.
Maybe that's why people all over the world celebrate the moon to such a great extent. In India, the Festival of Colours takes place on the first full moon day of February. The message, the triumph of good over evil. At the Thai Festival of Lights on a full moon, all the anger and resentment that has accumulated over a year is packed onto a raft and left to float away. The passion between man and moon is constantly finding new highlights. It's like a secret bond that seems to renew itself in time with the moon.